The Innovators Network.
Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
Welcome to this week's show here at Killer Innovations. We have another guest that I've invited to join the show this week. As I've shared before, as many of you know, I have a variety of my contacts and people I truly respect over my career that I bring onto the show, typically around the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is always that first full week of January, in order to kind of touch base and hear what's going on, particularly in the tech space, new technologies, new innovations that are coming out. We haven't had CES for a couple of years, albeit it did happen this year, but I did not go, and my guests that I'm having on these series of shows were not in Las Vegas either, but wanted to get an opportunity to hear what is going on, what is coming out, and the kind of their thoughts, their pulse on what's happening in the Valley, but more broadly, what's happening in the business and in the technology world. So today's guest is Tim Bajarin. I've known Tim for 2 decades, I'm guessing. He's the president of Creative Strategies, which is one of the leading industry analyst firms, futurists. Creative Strategies really does take the long view. Many companies in Silicon Valley listen to Tim and his staff to kind of get a feel for what's coming next, kind of the minds and pulse and thinking of consumers, businesses, and then the innovations that are going to satisfy. So you're going to get a lot out of today's show. Tim at Creative Strategies has had the ear and the minds of leading thinkers in the Valley. He was an analyst that we talked to a lot when I was the CTO for Hewlett-Packard. He was a close advisor to Steve Jobs at Apple, even though Steve doesn't take advice from people, and Tim will even tell you that, albeit he may have given Steve advice, Steve did his own thing. But other companies would include, Xerox. I've talked about HP, Dell, AT&T, Microsoft, you name it. All have or currently are clients of Creative Strategies. So I've invited Tim to come on to the show today. We're going to talk about a wide range of things. We're going to talk about work from home and the impact of COVID and what does that translate into innovations, both in thinking about everything from home design to the technologies in the home, as people are going to seem to be less willing to leave the comfort of their homes. They've built this up over the 2 years of COVID to go back into office environments. We'll talk about Apple and what's going on there, and then more broadly about what's going on in Silicon Valley. So you're not going to want to miss this. At the end of today's episode, I asked him the question about what one technology, what one innovation is he most excited about that's going to have big impact that you the listener, should be aware of. So you're going to want to stay and listen to the end and hear Tim Bajarin's thoughts on what that is. Before we jump into this week's episode, I've got the favor to ask: like, follow, share. Like us on social media, follow us, like the show, follow us, and share. Help us spread the news, spread this episode. If there's people who you think would benefit, let them know. And without further ado, let's jump in to this week's episode.
This episode is sponsored by Zoom. With Zoom, you can streamline your communication, collaboration, and creativity all in one place. Zoom is the market-leading platform that provides video meetings, voice, webinars, and chat across desktops, phones, tablets, and conference room systems. To learn more about Zoom and sign up for your free account, visit killerinnovations.com/Zoom.
So, Tim, good to see you. It's been a while. We normally get together annually in Las Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show. Haven't been able to do that for the last 2 years given COVID, and I haven't even been able to come back out to Silicon Valley to see you or any of the other friends and contacts out there. So how's everything been going with you with creative strategies? I know recently you guys have been doing a bunch of new studies and that, and one of particular just talking about COVID is just the change that COVID is instilling, particularly in a work from home environment.
Yeah, it's again, all of us have gone through this exact experience where we were shut down for 6-7 months, where we actually couldn't even leave our homes and go to the offices. And there was kind of a gradual shift where you could kind of go in, some could go in, some couldn't. Some companies like Apple, a lot of their engineering staff did go back within about a month because they really needed to be on site because of the equipment they needed. They went through serious protocols of sanitation and masking and testing and everything. But what has happened over the last, especially 18 months, is businesses, big and small, have started to come to the realization that the idea of bringing everybody back to the office and demanding that is no longer a reality. One, people have started getting used to the idea of working more at home and have been demanding flexibility. And what we're seeing a lot of, for example, when people are actually going for job interviews, especially here in the Valley, the issue of how many days they have to work in the office is actually a big question. Some of the companies that we're talking to, and the big ones, are basically saying, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, the rest of them you can work from home. They're all playing around with different schedules. But we recently just did a big work from home study on this, and we began to really get a tighter view of this, and what some of the things that the IT directors are going to have to think about. One big one that came out of this, which I'm not sure is surprising, but when we first started doing Zoom calls and all of the other things that we were doing to connect, WebEx, and et cetera, we just did it. We got our laptops, logged on, and we didn't think about background and lighting and all of this other stuff. What has happened now is this users especially have become more aware of the fact that they want to look better when they're presenting. They want their house to be clean. In fact, one of the things that came out of the study is that there was a real dislike of people seeing backgrounds that were grayed out or, had that, whatever, the tint, so you can't see what they're doing. And virtual screens were kind of in a mix. Some of them liked them, some I didn't. But my point is that one thing that came out, and it was kind of really clear, is that the work from home crowd now is become more sophisticated in how they are creating their work environment. They're no longer just putting the laptop down. They're actually buying third-party cameras that have better optics. They're buying lights that, shine on them better. Some of them are even dressing better,
Or at least from the waist up, right?
At least from the waist up, yeah. But here's where it's become a conundrum. They go back to the office and the situation is terrible, because how they look in the present at the office versus their nice environment at home, it's like a gigantic crisis. And now all of a sudden the IT guys are going, wait a minute, maybe we got to deal with the ambiance of our environments at home. At the office. And so some companies, of course, have done these huddle rooms and they've got multiple cameras and they're trying to do various things. But the environment, it turns out, is a big part of this new experience. And what consumers and what we call professional workers are just telling their IT guys and their managers is that the work at home scenario is just as effective, and I can control my environment. And they're looking for other things that help. For example, they want better software that screens out the kids yelling, right, or the dogs barking. One of the things that came out of this is the demand and need for more AI-based software to be integrated into the concept of Zoom and Teams that literally do screen out loud noises or et cetera. I had an instance the other day where my dog came in and tried to jump on my lap during the middle of an event. Considering he's a golden retriever, that was a pretty interesting challenge. But you maybe cannot screen that one out.
Well, I don't know, because I've seen pictures of Nemo. He's very cute.
Yeah, he's a beautiful dog, but he's big. Getting on my lap in the middle of a Zoom call is not easy for him or me. But my point is that the whole idea of work from home has changed.
Yeah,
it's no longer just get on your laptop and get in and now we're starting to think about the ambiance of the experience, backgrounds of the experience. And this has become a new challenge for IT directors because here's the other thing. Yes, I'm in the office talking to my colleagues, but at the same time, I'm Zooming with other friends and people are in China or they're in another part of the States. That even though you're going back to the office, you're still doing virtual environments.
Right.
And so you want to have a consistency of this great environment at home, and you want to have that in the office.
Now, is this you were saying, okay, this is part of the survey that Creative Strategies did. So these are workers for corporations who are working from home. How hot of an issue is this? Is this like warm?
It was at the top. It was one of the top things in their list.
Wow.
We were shocked.
Wow.
We were shocked.
I could see it as being an annoyance thing. But
but that's the point. They've had 18 months of dealing with this.
Yeah.
And so they've gotten to the stage now where they're saying, well, I'm a professional. This is a business environment. I'm not talking to grandma and, et cetera. When I am in front of colleagues, I want to put my best foot forward in the sense of the house looking good, the background environment looking good, et cetera.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. I'll give you my own little analogy, right? Because I'm sitting here, I'm on a Zoom call. I am on a radio station broadcast stage studio that I had built into the house, 1,200 square foot studio. The image behind me is actually the view out that window, albeit I'm still using a little bit of a virtual background because I've got 2 lights that are out for repair at the moment. But the amount of people who actually either been here to see the studio or who I've turned everything off so they could see the studio have asked me for who did mine. Because I actually had a professional come in, design it, set it up, and run it. The number of people that have reached out to me to get the contact information for my studio designer, for them to do their studio, is I guess I should have correlated it to what you just said. Because everybody's like, I want that studio. I want the lighting. I want the microphone. I want everything, so that, again, you look good. I didn't realize, I just thought it was a one-off thing, but what you're telling me is it's more universal.
It is only because it's a learning experience, right? Yep. We've had 18 months of, scenarios where we watched people, in closets. It started out in closets, by the way, which is even more strange because they had to get away from everybody else and try to get a little area. The other thing that's interesting about in the Valley, and I don't know how this is in other parts of the country, but when this started happening, demand for houses in the Valley went up exponentially. People that were actually working in, say, San Francisco, wanted to have a home that they could be in more rested environment anyway, more space,
Yep.
But they all, and it happened, I have 3 families that moved into our area who either worked for Google or Micron or et cetera. And the idea was to get a home that had bigger and more space in order to cocoon, let's say. But the priority was to have a dedicated room that they could work in, that could be their Zoom studio or their et cetera, you know?
Yeah, well, that actually,
anyway,
a friend of mine, well, my real estate agent, when I bought this place 8 years ago, she sold 2 lots that I had here in Colorado to people who want to build on it. And but she was commenting because the flood of people who homeschool room. I'm going to have my kids home. I want a room dedicated for homeschooling. I need a room dedicated that's not next to the wall with the kids, so that I can have my Zoom room, so I could Zoom for meetings and all of that. So it's that is a universal thing. It's not a valley thing. Everybody's. I think and now. I originally was an architecture major, right? So a friend of mine's an architect. I was talking with him, and new custom homes are all being designed now. Architects are designing studios now into new custom built homes as part of just a standard thing. It's not a get past COVID and we go back to normal. I don't think we go back to normal.
No, we don't. And I do believe that we're moving towards what in essence is going to be a hybrid environment that is the norm. But having said that, it means that where you are presenting from at your home studio, et cetera, can no longer be just an afterthought. It needs to be thought of as a part of the professional experience. So that was one thing that came out of the study that we thought was pretty fascinating. The other things that came out of the study that was important was the fact that that particular level of interest was across not only large business but even small businesses. That where they were using this in a small business office, they spruced up the small office, let's say, and had better accoutrements or flowers or etc. It wasn't just a one-off for the big guys; it was across the board. And then the other one big thing that I suspect that, and again, this was the 3rd study we did on it. We did one at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We did one 6 months later, and then we did one that was just completed 1st of January. And this particular one had, you could actually see the incredible growth of thinking over that 18-month period to how people are now thinking about work from home, what their priorities are, and the fact that we are in a business environment that will never go back to normal. We are going to live within some form of a hybrid environment, at least in the context of the knowledge worker.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so if you did the 3 studies, were there any surprises, shifts between the 3 studies? Because, I mean, my guess is opinions in the early COVID was one way, and then now the most recent one you said just wrapped up a month ago.
Well, the original one just thought that this was a one-off anomaly.
Right.
Because they had no idea. We were going to be shut down for 3 months, pandemic's over, and we'll go back to the office, right? 6 months, 7 months in, it began to be clear that this may be a little longer than we expected because we started getting variants, et cetera. And by that time, the big corporations who had a lot of staff literally changed their way of thinking about their internal environments, right? Within 6 months, they started building huddle rooms. They started expanding how people could work together. No longer, in fact, I had a customer, which is just an amazing story, who just before the COVID outbreak, they had redone their entire facility that houses over 20,000 people to the community concept. Everybody, they just had big tables, chairs everywhere, and you didn't have an office. You came in, grabbed a chair, and you were working there all day long. And they spent millions of dollars on that design on 4 big campuses. Within 6 months, they had to throw that out and completely redesign their facility to accommodate not only COVID spacing, but built in huddle rooms. They built in designated safety features. A whole slew of things. And now these same companies are evolving again to accommodate these. And now that one big thing, as I said, we've brought this up with some of them, is the fact that they can't just expect their staff to come in to a bare office that just looks, sterile. That they're going to have to do something to make it match the environment that's maybe not quite as nice as the one they've got, the new ones at home, but one that says, hey, I'm happy going to the office and working in this environment as much as I am at home, but I still need that flexibility.
Yeah, it's almost like you got to stage it. It's almost like a staging process. We were talking before about, when I was at HP and you would come over onto the campus and we'd go into a Halo room. Well, the whole Halo room was designed by DreamWorks Studios. They actually came in and designed everything, including the sound absorption and everything, to make the room really have a special kind of lighting with just the right brightness and everything to make sure you look good and all of that. Those were also $100,000 rooms, back in the day. But it sounds like it's a little bit of that with a little bit of staging to make people feel like, wow, I want to go in there for that because I can look good, it's effective, it works, it collaborates,
Well, that's the biggest, again, the study did a lot of things, but the fact that this came up so high in it is caught us off guard. And the fact that they wanted that same type of environment to be better than just a sterile office when they came back.
Right.
And again, 6 months, we'll do the study again in 6 months and see, what has changed. But in the 18 months, that was a big one that everybody got into this. And, at first it was just, I got to just do it. We'll just put the laptop down, sit it on a table and, get going. Now they want to have better cameras. They want to, in fact, all the new laptop makers are really working hard at trying to do better with the camera. But you've got all these other companies that are doing, whether it be Kensington or Poly,
or Logitech, or any of those guys.
Logitech, they're all doing better cameras, doing better software. And we did find that about 50% of the respondents moved to a secondary camera and not using their laptop camera anymore.
Right.
So that became another important thing. And a lot of them, again, went to bigger monitors. That was the other piece that came out of it. But as a part of their little office setup, they were not just looking at and dealing with just the laptop. They were creating their own little broadcasting environment now. And you could do that fairly inexpensively. You can get a really good Logitech camera for about $100. And your flat screen monitors have gone down a lot compared to what it was even 3 years ago. So, but it wasn't just that; it was also the environment. So,
well, what else on as we shift a little bit maybe into the technology world, right? You were a private personal advisor to Steve Jobs, throughout Steve's return and even pre-return tenure at Apple, and you are a key influencer in the Valley, and there's a lot of change that is happening, right? You talked about the monitors, you talked about the laptop guys, when I was at HP, right? I'm working on the personal system side, and how do you innovate into something that people kind of think is a commodity, but there's still a lot of room to innovate. I mean, Apple being the perfect example. Apple historically has had 3, 4, 5% of the laptop market from a global basis. But when you look at what they've done, which is not just take everybody else's stuff and skin it, but instead actually innovate what's inside of it, it's a different world out there now.
It is, and it starts at the semiconductor level. You've seen a complete shift in the role of semiconductors. Let me just point out one thing that you said earlier that is a close associate of Steve, that I advised him, which is true. On many occasions I did. He never listened to me, but that was a totally different issue.
Steve never listened to any. Steve and I met more than a few times, and he would ask the question, you'd give him the answer, and then he would still go off and do whatever it is he wanted to do.
Oh, no, it was always that way. Anyway, my point is that the whole idea, I forgot, what was, we were moving into the issue.
Well, talking about semiconductors and
I'm sorry, semiconductors.
The fact that it's no longer just about using generic parts, but it's actually about innovating the whole thing. And semiconductors being one of the key areas that a lot of people are focusing on.
Well, it's also the evolution. It's the evolution of the Intel competitors. I mean, AMD has become a powerhouse.
Yeah.
You can't deny the fact that they have taken on the challenge under Lisa Su, who's their CEO, and she has completely changed the value proposition for the company. She's given Papermaster, who's the CTO, latitude to become much more innovative, and they're gaining an immense amount of business in the server side. They basically own, the GPU for the gaming sides, especially with the consoles. Qualcomm has become an immense powerhouse, not only in the sense of what they're doing with 5G and communications chips. They're based on what they're doing with ARM, they're getting into, things like laptops and Chromebooks and things like that. But the one thing that kind of happened in the last year that is kind of shaking up the valley in semiconductor is the Apple's introduction of the M1 chip. I remember when Apple briefed us on this, both Ben and I, who is actually a much more experienced semiconductor researcher than I am because of his background in engineering, we got done with it and we both came away with the same conclusion. Apple really expanded the ability to, with that M1 chip, to create greater power and more functionality, but they did it in such a way that it did the least amount of energy necessary and power savings. And both of our reaction was, whatever Apple did, we don't understand, and it defies some of the physics that we know exist today.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk to the other competitors who have delved into what Apple's doing, they have the same kind of reaction. They applaud Apple for not only the new level of performance of M1, and are amazed at what Apple's done at the power management and power capability. And they're now chasing Apple in the same way. What is the other thing that's happened in this came out of the study a little bit too, is that the demand for Macs in enterprise has gone up significantly. In the study, when we asked people about the ability to, or what was their primary laptop or computer system that they wanted to do work from home, 60% said it was the Mac.
Wow.
And that was higher than it was at the beginning of the survey. The other thing that became clear is that these users in any enterprise or even medium-sized businesses want choice. They don't want to be told, I can only have a Windows machine. I can only have a Chromebook. They want to also have potentially a Mac. So Apple is not necessarily going, and you'll never see Apple as doing a dedicated enterprise marketing campaign. On the other hand, they're coming from kind of the behind the scenes and gaining ground in enterprise.
Well, and as you and I were talking before we started the show today, where I'm CEO, we actually give the employees choice, Mac or HP. You pick whichever one you want. And actually, Apple, what's interesting, and I never knew they did this, but at the Apple stores, they actually have people dedicated for enterprise sales.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have this woman who is at the Mac store or the Apple store right here at it's called Flatirons Mall, the closest mall to between Boulder and Denver, but it's maybe like 5 miles from our office. And there's a woman there who's dedicated business sales for Apple. She serves our account, she serves our people. We buy our Mac, buy all of our Mac stuff there, and employees get iPhone discounts and those kinds of things. And I just never knew but they do it and they embed it into the store. So the salesperson's actually part of the store staff at your local Apple store.
They kind of hinted about this when they did that original deal with IBM. And then Salesforce came on board to commit to creating the Salesforce apps. Then Oracle did as well. And once you started to get the Mac native apps of corporate and IT management software, that began to change. But there was still a Windows PC bias within the IT department.
Yep.
But the younger generation who basically cut their teeth on Apple and the Mac, once they started getting into the business environments, basically forced the IT guys' hands. Now, having said that, the issue of support becomes the bigger issue. IT departments used to, and as you know this, the IT departments wanted to centralize around a single platform. Even though in that case it was Windows, even though it might be an HP or a Dell or whatever, but the software support would be across multiple devices. Now all of a sudden they have this new Macintosh, the Mac OS to deal with, and Apple's done a really good job in creating the service side of support for that as well. But my point is that the thing that has changed, I think, especially since over the last 2 years, is Apple's development of their own processors. One, that was huge because it allows them to control their destiny across the board. And two, now the introduction of this new M1 processor. And then we expect to see the new M2 this year, which we believe will not only have more power, but even better battery life, better power management.
Well, it's interesting because, the processor work is impressive by any sense of whatever measurement you want to apply to it. But also what is interesting about Apple is, and a lot of people, were kind of questioning, when Steve unfortunately passed away way too early in his life and Cook took over. And I knew Cook when he was at Compaq. When he was head of supply chains at Compaq way back. And everybody didn't think, is Cook going to be able to continue to drive the innovation curve? Yeah, I think that's kind of proven out. And the rumors of the new things coming out, what is Apple going to release in AR, VR? That's all been kind of the rumor mill. Apple Car. And I know a few people that Apple's recruited. I'm guessing they're in the car based on what I know what their background is, but nobody talks, right? And around Apple. You just think about the number of fronts that Apple is innovating on. It's impressive. It is impressive.
It is. And I actually got a chance to talk to Tim about his AR thinking right after he introduced ARKit in 2017. And he made a comment to me. He said, look, this may be actually the most important contribution Apple will make in tech. They're that high on the AR approach. He's not a big fan of VR. He is not a Facebook, Zuckerberg, metaverse convert. And I don't know if he ever will be. He does believe in mixed reality. He's gone on record saying that more recently, where he talks about AR and MR. He never mentions VR. But his view is, and if you look at what he's done with the developers kit for AR, you can actually see that the idea there is superimposing information on an existing environment. And if again, like you, I'm sure we've all spent time under VR hoods. My tolerance level under a VR hood, unless I'm gaming, is like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas in an AR scenario, if you get the glasses or the goggles right, and it does provide a value proposition that adds an incredible amount of not only information but value and something that's important, you probably will get a lot more people to buy in. How Apple goes about this, I don't know. I like you and I have talked about this before. Getting the kind of technology into these kind of glasses that's necessary to do this, whether it be the optics, the CPU, the GPU, the battery. I mean, this is brain surgery science, right?
Yeah.
This is not different. This is not easy to do.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because you talked about the M1 on the battery life, right? And everybody, I remember for years people were always, interested in battery technologies, because I always point out the fact that battery density, power storage per cubic centimeter of battery material, at most improves about 10% a year. It's a chemistry problem, right? Yet we've seen big leaps and bounds in the ability for laptops to last longer, or my Apple Watch to be able to go all day. I don't have to really put it in the charging stand until I get up in the morning to go get in the shower, And people go, well, isn't that battery? I go, no, it's not battery. It's everything that goes in the watch. Everything that goes in your laptop has now become so power efficient. It actually leads towards the glasses, because you're not going to do a radical change on battery unless there's some new chemistry being developed, and there's some interesting work that's going on in that space. But you got to get all the right pieces together, and you have to have patience. And the one thing I've always been impressed with Apple is their patience. You remember Andy Grignon? He was one of the original 6 engineers on the iPhone, and Andy, I got Andy into AHP when we acquired Palm, so I got to talk to Andy and hear all the stories or whatever. And you hear the stories of when the work began on the iPhone until it was actually announced, the patience that Apple had to wait for the technology to be right. Not just release it because it's holiday season, but we need one more generation of Moore's Law. We need one more generation in touchscreen to get better reactivity on this glass. The patience to get it right. And that's the one thing that I've always been so impressed with Apple is they'll take, everybody's been beating up Apple for not being faster on things. Patience pays out in the end.
Yeah, and that's part of Tim's DNA, to be honest with you. He's in no rush. Even if he believes this is a game changer, the last thing he wants to do is put something out that doesn't work. And that's why, the work that they've done in the background with ARKit to start getting the developers ready for this is really amazing. And by the time he does do glasses, whenever that actually comes out, you're not going to have a half-baked product. You're going to have something that works. Now, having said that, it's still going to be an early version. And as you know, from Apple's case, as is many others, sometimes it takes a second or third version before it actually picks up.
Right.
That's okay. What'll happen is the early adopters will come in, help them fine tune it and whatever. But my point there with this M1, and by the way, I actually do not believe the intelligence is in the headset. I think it's in the iPhone. And it's wireless, but I think most of the CPU, GPU processing will be done on the iPhone, and think of the glasses more as the new screen. For the kind of things that I think they want to do, you just can't get that built into the glasses or even goggles, to be honest with you.
Well, it's interesting because I've never had an Apple Watch. I carry both an iPhone and a Samsung. But I got an Apple Watch because I wanted all of the medical things. You and I are kind of in the age category where you want to keep track of stuff and that type of thing. And it's a phenomenal. I mean, I've just absolutely just fallen in love with it. But when you go to get your Apple Watch, you get an option. Do you do cellular? And I just did an interview with Bob O'Donnell, and we got talking about the rise in 5G and how fast that's going to be. And you think about the fact that you can get an iPhone with an eSIM in it on 5G, which really says, I got such good bandwidth to the watch that I can use edge compute to do all the computational pieces. And you think about, okay, Apple's experimenting that within the watch. It would kind of say that that's kind of a technology that you could put into a goggle, and you also don't have a dependency on the phone in some cases if you don't have the phone's not within 35 feet.
Although the way I actually think Apple thinks about this is by tying it to the iPhone. And by the way, the Apple works better watch when it's tied to the iPhone, to be honest with you, right? Is this is another way to keep the iPhone franchise growing.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're at the strategic business side of Apple, do you really want to put all the intelligence into the glasses and make the iPhone obsolete? And I don't think that's the thinking.
Well, I think it forces innovators to think not everything's got to be integrated into one unit. You can, here, I've got my iPhone and I can leverage what I already always carry with me. I'm never more than 20 feet away from my iPhone any given day anyways. So I didn't go, actually, I made the choice not to do the 5G into my watch.
I didn't either in mine.
Right. And so I just did it to my, to my iPhone. But it also says, and I think you're making the exact correct point, which is strategically think about it as these different franchises, but franchises that multiply value when together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit. We got a few more minutes left. I wanted to catch, some of your thoughts on what's going on in Silicon Valley, right? There's, every place I go, when people find out that I was at HP in the Valley, everybody that does not live in the Valley has this kind of inherent interest in, what's going on, what's new, what's different. And at the same time, though, there's also been, people taking the pot shots at the Valley at the same time, big tech, big bad, tech type of thing. So what's going on there?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, there's no question that the regulatory side has become more prevalent in a lot of the companies' thinking, especially the EU is much more aggressive in the sense of trying to harness the growth and or areas where they think Apple has too much control, or Facebook has too much control, or whatever. That's high on people's list. Although all of these companies have fairly strong lobbying groups in both Europe and Washington. I will tell you that dealing with Washington myself, and I've been doing this for years, including being on some presidential councils over the years. Washington honestly does not understand tech. And, I've gone and talked to committees and a lot of the times when I'm talking to them, it's like I'm talking to, they think I'm from outer space. And we actually had a congressman from the Valley years ago who was just wonderful because he was a tech exec. And he and I would go out and I'd meet him in DC periodically. And, his basic thing too was they're coming to me to help them understand. And even with that, the actual understanding of it is difficult. Now, having said that, you do have a few senators and others that have become much more tech savvy. and they they understand a little bit more about these antitrust issues. Mm-hmm. The problem they've got is the antitrust laws of the past don't work for the antitrust thinking of today. So my actual thinking about how U.S. actually deals with these kind of crackdowns is, yes, they'll talk big, but I don't know how fast they can get any action, because Washington is besides the fact that you've got squabbles on the right and the left, trying to get them to agree on almost anything is difficult. And while they may talk big about clamping down on Meta and clamping down on Apple, the fact of the matter is Apple's employing 100,000 workers, most of them in the U.S. Meta's tens of thousands of workers here in the U.S. Do you really want to clamp down on them and cause a lot of layoffs? And there's a balancing act here that is not just, okay, it's antitrust, but what is it? And one thing that I saw the other day that is a statement that I forget who said it, but they said, before you clamp down and start dealing with these antitrust issues, really think through the consequences, not only the pros, but the cons. And the economic aspect of it is going to, I think, start coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting challenge, right? But I think also, governments around the world react when there's a high-profile bad actor doing something, or something gets very high-profile where somebody does something, either intentionally or unintentionally, that gets a lot of press, and it gets everybody out with their pitchforks looking for, to take somebody down in that process, right?
Well, but that's, again, it's also to justify their existence, to be honest with you. I dealt with the EU multiple times on some of these issues, including at the country levels. And a lot of those guys get into this because it helps their political career.
Right.
Now, I'm not arguing that they're wrong. I'm just saying that when the antitrust guys go after this, they need to look at it, including the economic impact of what they're trying to do.
Yep.
Breaking up Apple makes absolutely no sense. And even the concept of how you break up Facebook, I'm not sure how you would do that without causing incredible disruption. It might be easier there because of Instagram and messaging and what they do, but for trying to do something with Apple, that's why when you look at the stuff they're going after Apple, they're really dealing with the Apple Store issue. They're really not talking anymore about breaking up Apple.
Yeah, and I mean, they talked about Alphabet and all of that. Do you break up, the Google franchises into separate entities? But again, you're trying to, is it really going to be, a 1984 all over again when they broke up AT&T and created all the baby bells, and then 20 years later, all the baby bells got back together and made AT&T all back to it all rolled up again, back into one big large entity.
But that's why, and again, you can't forecast the future, but you have to think about the economic toll of going after these type of companies. And again, I'm not arguing that they shouldn't be under scrutiny, but you have to take a harder look at not only the positive, but the negative when you do this. And that's what Congress, at least in the US and even the EU, they've dealing with them over the years, they don't think about the consequences. They only think about the headlines.
Right. Yeah, that's all. Regulators get paid to regulate. And so therefore they want to do their job. They feel like they have to fix something that may not even be broken. So Tim, as we wrap up the conversation today, the one question I want to end on is What new thing, innovation, technology, whatever, what's the one new thing that you are most excited about that you think the listeners should keep an eye on?
Well, I do think the evolution of the semiconductors that are faster, more powerful, and are becoming more energy efficient, because that affects every device you're going to have going forward. So one, you got to really keep an eye on what's going on. And like I said, not only AMD, but Qualcomm and a lot of the smaller groups like Micron, who have a huge impact on infrastructure type stuff, and within the servers and things of that nature. I'm doing a lot of work with one of my colleagues, Barton Goldenberg, who he and I did the largest CRM shows, and we're beginning to get a lot of requests from enterprise accounts to help them understand the quote unquote metaverse. And regardless of what you think about the metaverse, the fact of the matter is we are moving towards a virtual world layer that we are going to interact with. And businesses now have got to start thinking about, how do you do business in the metaverse? I wrote a piece for Forbes this week suggesting that corporations really need to start thinking about creating a what I call a metaverse investigator, to have a person in the company. And I said, and I profiled a particular woman at Lockheed, Shelley Peterson, who actually has that title for Lockheed, principal investigator. But I pointed out that for some big companies, doing a global researcher may not be the case, but maybe you need to do it at the field service level or the sales team level or the customer service level, and have them be part of the program. And that makes more sense. I just don't know how fast this comes together, because I do think the metaverse concept of us doing things in a virtual world is evolutionary. It's not going to happen quick. But I created a site. It's called ISM Guide. It's on ismguide.com/metaverse. And we actually created a resource center there. And we have over 100 case studies of companies already doing using headsets in field service, sales, healthcare, telecom, manufacturing. When we started doing the research, we were shocked at how many companies were already implementing it. Walmart, for example, when they bring in a new employee, they're onboarded using a VR headset. And in fact, it's funny because it's been so effective that the people who use those headsets want to take it home with them. I mean, it's like, wow. But my point is that again, I think the semiconductor activity is probably the most important thing to watch, because it's going to power everything. But we're watching really close at this, the whole concept of the metaverse, which I do think is in its very early definition stage. And then I will bring up one other last thing before we close, is I do think we're going to, as an industry, because this is not going to be something the government can do, but we are going to have to create an open metaverse. I did an event, audio cast with AWE, the Augmented World Expo people, a week ago, where we had some specialists on there who really understand the metaverse, including I forget Charlie's last name, but he wrote the book on the metaverse in 2018. But the question really came up is, should we have an open metaverse? And one thing I'm most worried about is that no matter what the metaverse is, it will be, it could end up being less open. It could be Meta's version of a metaverse. It might be Disney's version of the metaverse. It might be Apple's version of the metaverse. I think this is a huge problem we as an industry are going to have to deal with. Can I create an avatar, for example, that can go across every one of the different services? And we don't have time to get into now, but I do think that one of the things that the tech sector is going to have to really look seriously at is and this goes really back to the early days of HTTP and the internet, et cetera. And we called Web 3.0, the next version of this, but it's beyond Web 3.0. It's really the whole idea of, if we are going to go to a virtual world, it needs to be an open virtual one, not one that is corrupted by corporate greed.
Yep, agreed. And it's basically what became HTML to enable the browser world where you can have multiple browsers, but the information is all in one place. You don't have to connect to different networks. We need that for the metaverse. So I think that's a great point to end on. Tim, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time and getting together, but prefer to get together face to face, but hopefully we can soon.
Yeah, you come out to the Valley, we'll go have dinner.
Yeah, we'll go grab dinner. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Phil.
So what are your thoughts about what Tim shared, especially at the end? Now, there's been a lot of buzz and a lot of talk about the metaverse, with the conversations that have been occurring, with Facebook actually changing their name to Meta, and Mark Zuckerberg's big energy around the metaverse and the belief that it's going to become real. I think Tim's point about creation of an open metaverse is a very important topic, something that we as innovators really need to think about and maybe provide a solution to what this thought of an open metaverse. We are looking at something, there's been a lot of work that's already been done, but I think there needs to be more thinking, more innovation around how do we create this as an open platform. Yeah, businesses need to be able to create business models that work, but we need an open platform. Very much back to the early 90s, 94, 95, 96 days of the invention of web browsers and web browsing and HTML and the protocols of the internet that allowed for an open platform that then others can build business models on top of. We are there. People call it Web 3, but that's not fully baked and it's not really in the same context. I think there's more thinking about it. So in my belief, I believe, Tim's point about the open metaverse is absolutely critical and something that we all should be talking about. And again, hopefully you got benefit from the show. We did go long. This is probably one of the longest episodes we've done in quite some time, but talking with Tim and getting his insights about everything going on, I just felt it was so valuable that we just kept recording throughout the entire conversation. So hopefully you found that helpful. You found that beneficial. Would love to hear your feedback. You telling me, nope, Phil, cut it right at 30 minutes or cut it at 20 minutes or whatever, or break these down into more shows. I'm interested in your feedback. Let me know. Drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com. With that, I'm going to thank you. I'm not going to take any more of your time. You've given us more than enough time this week. Get out there, innovate on your ideas, help us change the world for a better place. You have a role. With that, we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.
This show is distributed by the Innovators Network. For more information and other great shows and content, visit theinnovators.network.